Policy at University of Chicago. I actually started last year with the Data Science for Social Good Fellowship. And as a project manager, so I had 4 of the projects last summer kind of under my purview. And then this summer with DSSG, scoped probably 8 of the 12 projects that we actually ended up doing with Joe's help. And my background, I have a degree in general engineering with a minor in computer science, and so I've been kind of focused on human-computer interaction, user-centered design, and really focusing on how are we making sure that whatever we build and whatever we create is something that people actually need, and not just like, well, I built this cool technology, why is no one using it? I can tell you why, you weren't addressing a real problem. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Joe Walsh, and I've been with Data Science for Social Good Fellowship. This is my 4th summer, so I'm one of 4 people who've been in the program all 4 years. And I've been working at the University of Chicago, write and learn year-round as well at the Center for Data Science and Public Policy, working on a number of different issues. My background, I am a political scientist by training, and I did a lot of econometrics, and then some data mining, and then I went and worked at GE Healthcare as the lead forecaster for a while before joining this program. So for the past few years, I've also been involved with the scoping process that we do at DSSG.
So, DSSG, we have, during the summer fellowship, so aside from our year-round programs, we usually do about 12 projects every summer, and those 12 projects, in order to get to 12 projects, we usually scope something like 100 different organizations, initial calls, cold emails, warm emails, conversations at conferences like this, you name it, it's probably turned into a project at some point. So over the last 4 years, we've done, upwards of 50 projects, including some for year-round stuff, with a variety of organizations. So we do anything from nonprofits to government agencies, in a lot of different content areas. So for a lot of organizations, they say, we're used to using data to justify funding decisions. Now we can use data to improve what we do, and this is a major shift for a lot of organizations. And so half of that, as we talk about project scoping, is some of the education that happens just even in the scoping of, oh, I didn't know that's possible, or I didn't know that was something that we could do. And so certainly as data scientists end up working with more project partners, where you get in and have worked together for like 3 months, by the end of it, both sides are like, oh, I have so many ideas now. One on what's possible on the data science side, and the other on like the content area and other areas that you could potentially create some interesting projects.
So these are the things that we're really looking for when we scope projects, especially with DSSG, but the same general checklist is going to work for what you're doing at your organization as well. First, if you don't have a solvable problem, then you should probably stop paying attention to that problem and talk about a different problem that you might be interested in solving. Right? So that's really important to have. Second would be a challenging problem. And by challenging, what we're really talking about are the resources that you have available to solve it. So one, you want to tackle something that's really important, but you also want to have enough people, enough computational resources, everything else to solve that problem. We're not going to be able to solve poverty in 3 months at DSSG, so that's not that doesn't fit within our scope, but you also don't want a really, really simple problem where, in our case, we're working with 3 to 4 fellows for 3 months, and it's something that they can do in 2 days. So we're looking for something somewhere in there. You would also want to look for a problem that's going to fit your organizational constraints. Next, we want a problem that's going to have social impact. We've actually had hedge funds apply to be partners at DSSG. We personally don't consider that to be social good, so we haven't accepted any of them as partners. But I don't know, for your organization, you might be interested in doing that work. I don't know. So you want to make sure that you have a project here that's going to have the impact you're really interested in. And we also look for partners who are really interested in the work that we're doing, and they have the capability to do something with what we produce, and they're willing to do it. So like this is often actually a big challenge. Like there might be a person in an organization, for example, who really likes data science, wants to bring it into the organization, but if that person doesn't have the support necessary, if the leadership is opposed, for example, in that organization, probably not going to be something that we should spend a lot of resources on. And then we want to make sure that we have the appropriate data. So if you want to solve some kind of medical problem, you want data on that medical problem from the past, at a minimum. And then you also want a lot of other data that can be useful for that type of problem as well. If you don't have that type of data, then you're not going to be able to solve it very well. Now this goes from top to bottom. What we found is easiest to hardest when we're scoping projects for DSSG. And solvable problem, a lot of people have that. Down to getting the data, that can be a real challenge. Do you have to get it out of systems where it's really difficult to get it out? Or are there organizational constraints? Maybe someone doesn't want to give you the data that you need. If you want to work with us in a particular case, maybe it's really difficult for you to get the data sharing agreement that you need to make that happen. So these are all things that you want to think about in scoping projects.
And I think that's something here that we have a number of people who come to us and say, we have all this interesting data, and we're like, ooh, well, you need someone who's actually going to take action on that. So it's great, like, in most cases, we ask if they have the existing relationships to kind of partner together and form something there where usually this is correct and that we get to data last, because if we haven't answered those other questions, we have issues. And a lot of this conversation is framed around those 3-month projects. But in a lot of cases, a 3-month project with a team of 3 to 4 people, even if it's not based on the summer constraints, that's something that we're actually able to say, hey, here's a proof of concept, here's enough that if we start with the easy data or the easy relationships and go from there, then we can have some win that we can get to the more complicated things. Throughout the year, we have a little bit more flexibility in what we're working on.
One quick question. You said that there may be a situation where they wouldn't or maybe couldn't give up the data. Have you ever thought of it? Have you ever been able to say give a proxy result? In other words, you wouldn't necessarily need the detailed data, but being able to deliver some sort of proxy situations where they wouldn't have to give up the data, but somehow if they massage something, it could, as far as what the issue was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's going to be driven by what the problem is that they're trying to solve, and if that problem can be adjusted in some way, or if you do have the data to solve it, then that's great. Often though, we find that I can't think of many examples where that's happened, where we've been able to promote a proxy. I'm sure there's something that just not thinking of it. But
Usually, more often than not, okay, if we can't get to that data, either what's the closest approximation of the data, or like what's the closest approximation of the problem? At that point, we'll have to take a step back and say, what can we do with the data that's available? But it happens pretty frequently, actually, where people are like, okay, well, we want to give you anonymized data, so we're going to give you census block information instead of address level information. We're like, okay, well, if you're trying to identify if someone should be dispatching a CIT trained police officer to a specific address when they call 911, your census block information is not going to give you much information if you need to know a specific address to dispatch people. So that comes up pretty frequently, that in that case it may just mean that the dispatch is not the appropriate level to do the intervention, and it's actually, okay, if we're only going to get census block information, what can we do in terms of like going out and doing outreach in that community or reaching out to people? And so that usually shifts it, that there probably are some proxies, but usually if we can't get that specific data, we start from driving what we're trying to do and what actions we can take, and that drives what data we need, and why we end with data rather than starting there usually.
I was just wondering if they massaged it, if it was the actual detail, but if they massaged it, gave you a result set, which might do just as well rather than getting you the details. So that's, I guess.
It's a lot easier to talk specifics in that case. So like, okay, what exactly are you trying to do, and what can we do with that? So.
And I guess one last thing to point out though is that with this checklist, we said that we start with 100 to 2 years ago, 150 projects for DSSG that we need to scope. And we have to reduce that to about 12 projects, is that there's a huge number of projects that we don't end up doing. And so when you're scoping projects, a lot of things that you think of for whatever reason might not work, and that's just something that you should expect.
Yeah.
So all these 12 projects are basically finished within this 3 months. And after the 3 months, did any effort be taken to think deeper on the results of those projects, or starting some new projects? Just wondering of that.
Yeah, so the summer piece is funded as a training program specifically for the fellows, and so part of one of the goals of this workshop for the fellows in the room, they're usually coming in at the beginning of the 3 months if we've already done all this legwork to scope it, so saying, okay, can we give you all some experience to scope a project? But depending on the partner, so we're always going in hoping that there will be a partner who's like, if they're not willing to implement something, we usually don't move forward at that point as well. So moving forward after the 3 months of the summer is usually not just here's an analysis, it's here's an analysis and some recommendations of what to do, or here are the pieces to implement. We often partner with people post-summer and say, okay, we have continuing projects now. So our hope is that some of them will continue on, but part of that is at a 3-month kind of proof of concept, there's necessarily going to be some things that don't continue on after that because you said, cool, we either did everything we could or that didn't really work, and like, or we couldn't get the data that we thought we needed, any number of things. So it kind of like a normal sales pipeline almost, like you do 100 calls, 12 of them become projects, only some of those move into kind of the next level. Joe has meetings. All right, so I think one of the things that's pretty interesting here in the, as we're talking to a lot of nonprofits, a lot of governments, is really shifting to an agile methodology from traditional waterfall. And this is something that data science and agile fit really, really nicely together because it's all about learning. So every conversation you have, you learn more and that changes your thoughts about what should be done. And there's a lot of value in that. So it's going through some of these cycles very quickly of problem formulation, understanding the data that's available, understanding what the data is telling you, doing some sort of analysis and models, leading to validation, which goes back and then you refactor and say, okay, were we actually looking at the right problem? Is there something else that's potentially higher impact now? And you just keep iterating through that and deploy production pieces or programs or policy changes based on what you've learned from those cycles. And that's kind of expect that there will be small things coming into deployment over time based on continued learning, and that as you do this analysis, you're going to have learned so much more about the correct, like the next interesting step to take. And one of the things here, I think Joe started to allude to this, is you were just in the data maturity framework. The slide should look familiar, but if your goal is to make an apple pie, it's really important to have relevant and sufficient data. So oranges aren't going to get you very far towards building an apple pie. Apple cores, similarly, are going to build a disappointing pie. And apples, you really need apples, and you need probably more than one apple to get to a full apple pie. And so this is something, again, why we start with the data discussion a little bit later after we've identified what we're trying to do. Because people do come in and say, hey, I've got all these oranges, what can we do with it? And you're like, well, orange juice. But it's not going to get you to an apple pie.
So this slide comes from Raid, who, if you don't know, was the chief scientist for the Obama 2012 campaign. And this really gets to the definition of what the goal is that you're trying to solve. When it comes to a presidential campaign, a lot of people think that you just want to win by as much as possible, but actually that's not really the problem that you're probably trying to solve. The problem is you're trying to get 270 electoral votes. In this particular case, you want to maximize the probability that you're going to get 270 votes. 270 electoral votes instead of winning by as much as possible. That can have big implications for how you run a campaign. For example, if you're a Democrat, you're probably not going to go spend a lot of resources in Alabama because the chance is that you're not going to influence Alabama. Is going to vote Republican. You want to focus your resources where people can actually be influenced. That's really getting to what's at the bottom, like what are those actions that we can take, and how are we going to spend the resources to do it? So like in this particular case, you might want to register people, and you want to register people who are likely to support you. You want to persuade people who are likely to vote the way that you want them to vote. And then finally, you want to spend a lot of resources getting the people who are going to support you to the polls. You don't want to get people for the other side to get to the polls. So you might think of these actions, these are the things that you want to do to maximize that probability of getting 270 electoral votes instead of, say, like the most electoral votes possible.
And similarly, turnout's pretty much useless if people aren't already registered to vote. So there are like some natural places to think that our goal is 270 electoral votes and we're going through turnout, but we've missed a couple of steps here to actually get people to have the behavior that you want them to, or the outcome that you're going for. And so a lot of that is, who are we targeting and how are we reaching them? Do we have an effective program, or are we talking about program enrollment? So problem formulation, we go through a couple of steps. So the first is to identify goals. What are you trying to do here? What's the main cause that you're going for? Then we're going to identify the actions that you can take to achieve those goals, and making that really specific actions that are fine-grained questions and sub-actions and questions that you can look at the data that you have and answer some, like, how big is the population we're looking at? How persuadable are they? Then getting into the data sources and resources you need and have, and identifying the analysis and modeling that needs to be done. So what we're going to do now, and we may have to get up and move around a little bit, the goal really is to do a workshop. So how many folks here are from governments or other organizations that have problems that they would like to see solved? Okay. And how many folks are data science types? Okay. All right. We're stacked a little
Are
bit.
they supposed to be mutually exclusive?
No.
How many people are from organizations who don't want this whole
Get out. Okay. So what we'll do, and we'll have people move around a little bit, is if the folks who are from organizations that have problems that they want solved can raise their hands, we'll have people who are the data science types move towards those people, and then we're going to do a workshop where y'all are scoping that problem out. And so hopefully people are walking away with more of an idea of how these projects kind of evolve, and potentially having a piece of, if you want flip charts and things like that. The last session ended up being much more just discussion and a couple of people taking notes on computers, but really trying to get to, okay, let's see how this process goes in half an hour of what we can learn in that time. And I'll give some prompts kind of throughout of when you should be moving on to the next question. If it happens organically, go ahead and do that, but I'll be chiming in and go from there. So yeah, we can have the organization folks raise their hands and everyone else scurry. So for the folks from organizations, anything interesting come out of discussion with data science type people? Any interesting insights? Yeah.
Yeah, so we came up with, so I work for a startup called Health, and we built a database for Medicaid, and we were talking about things that you might do with that. We thought of how might you identify places where there's a lot of people who are eligible for Medicaid but don't use it. So we could maybe look at zip codes where we think there's a high density of people with incomes that would make them eligible for Medicaid, and yet in the Medicaid database we don't see very many people who are actually enrolled.
What else?
Can I ask on that? What was the problem that you posed before you answered that question?
We have Medicaid data and we want to do social good with it.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Interesting questions people ask? Yeah.
One of the interesting things that came out of our conversation, we were talking about food stamps, SNAP data, was to think about looking at the origin of the current model and system to help understand what questions to ask next. Something I hadn't thought about.
Talking with them and the team working with yesterday, I think a lot of times it's the details of the problem that that you don't think of. It's being able to dig deep into just the, I don't want to say minutia because that's minutia, maybe not the right term, but being able to ask the questions that we don't think of. We know there's a problem, we know we have this information, this is where we want to go. We do, like we talked about, interventions, but a lot of times it's just getting those details of how, correct identification.
And on the last session, one of the project partners said sometimes you're so close to it that you don't see the full scope of it, right? Or you either become you become it or you own it, that to get even just outside perspective for 20 minutes is something that sheds new light in different areas that it haven't been before. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Hi, I'm from the city of Syracuse, and I kind of just bombarded these guys with a lot of issues at first. So we deal a lot with concentrated poverty in Syracuse, and so they really helped with narrowing the scope, and also it's funny, I came across the issues of apples and oranges. We had what the city of Syracuse can do or influence, such as the zoning code, for example. That information is cool, but might not help in kind of understanding true issue of a situation or something like that. So it's a good conversation.
What about from the data science side? Any interesting just ways people are thinking about problems or any evolution over the course of a few minutes?
Well, we started out thinking that our problem was identifying fraud. It started steering more towards identifying intent for fraud, because that's really the issue at hand, and not getting false positives by just identifying fraud itself.
I guess the problem that we landed on was to try and help our friends at local radio station on their fundraising campaigns and kind of come up with creative ways to do that. And one of the things we were trying to think about was how we could create something that could help them from a marketing standpoint and generate interesting insight and draw attention, and while potentially still solving other problems within the organization. So we're looking at potentially breaking up a bunch of different silos that would allow us to tell with maybe almost a comedic level of detail where people's dollars are being spent, and even potentially allowing people to personalize their gift at that level of granularity. So we're kind of toying around with that idea, and I think at the end of the day, that could even also be used as a decision support system for managerial decisions. So that's a general idea.
One thing that came up was something that I found in the real world happens all the time, which is that the problem as initially defined is often halfway to a solution. So, for example, we were talking about forecasting jail populations within Nashville. And the first thought here was, well, we need a better forecast. And we spent a lot of time digging down into, well, what does that mean? What are we trying to get a forecast for? Is it, so we can allocate resources? Is it so that we can, we talked about early release programs and potential interventions, but a lot of what we came around to was trying to work from a point where, I think this is something that comes up a lot with people on the policy and project side, that there's already an idea of what the solution is, that the problem is almost implied. And so part of it is, for the data science side, is to say, wait, educate me, because I don't know what it is that you're facing. And I find sometimes you need to kind of go in and say, all right, teach me like I'm a child who doesn't understand anything about what you do, because some of the assumptions about what the world looks like aren't obvious to people who are coming at it fresh.
Yeah, I think we spend a ton of time on that, where I think in a lot of traditional research, people go, cool, here's a data set, and you run off with it, and come back 6 months later and go, here's this interesting thing I found, and they're like, duh, or so what? And that really it is a partnership, and kind of both coming in with fresh eyes, one, of what's possible, and two, of the whole situation. I know we're working on a project with Johnson County, Kansas, around criminal justice this summer, and just some of the conversations where they're like, yeah, so, parole is this, and jail versus prison, and we're like, what? Hold on, back up, what's the difference between jail versus prison? We're totally newbies here. And that's been kind of interesting to see, okay, what's actually possible, right? Where are the things that you just haven't thought about it before, or you get so ingrained in the system, you're like, this is the way we always do it, so that's clearly what we want to do. And we definitely see a lot of people as we're scoping projects come in and say, we've got the problem, we're pretty sure we know what the solution is, we just need someone to validate it. And you're like, well, that's not gonna work either. But a lot of times there is value in doing some analysis around things that people just believe to be truth. There's more crime on days where there's a full moon, and you're like, okay, we're gonna dig into this just to like stop dealing with that. Or, you know, there's a lot of things that people are like, we're pretty sure it's this, and a lot of what we're doing in data science, and I think especially for the organizations in the room, is there is ownership, and the human intuition is really important. So if we're looking at police officers, seeing what 5 different supervisors do, they're clearly individuals. So what can we push in there to start standardizing some of the way people are behaving, and also to bring out the good behaviors as well as the bad behaviors.
So is there more crime on the full moon?
There's a lot of literature that actually says it is, but no one knows why.
That I heard, because I actually have heard that, yes, that actually it is a yes. But I'm just curious if you guys think.
It's like, so what are you going to change? No more full moons?
Unfortunately,
Buy shades.
Yeah.
given the work that cities like Boston, Maya, have done with open data, this is a really easily testable proposition. I mean, the challenge is actually getting the data on moon cycles. But you know, assuming that is easily accessible, we can answer this pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of what I end up doing is being like, cool, is this going to take us an hour to dig into so we can stop having this conversation? Very good. Like, worth it, because otherwise it's going to come up.
Yeah, we just came up at the start of the session.
I have a question, because you mentioned doing this agilely. How do you, curiosity coming from project manager, how do you structure, do you then have sprints, and how do you structure the sprints? Do you have sprints per major of your 4 processes, or do you try to do them all together and you have like a little longer?
So I think specifically for the summer, because it's a 12-week process, it's a little bit more like we're essentially doing one sprint, kind of, like that's a long sprint, but we're saying, okay, we're going to do some detailed analysis, we're going to dig into kind of what kind of data stories are there, the descriptive statistics, okay, let's get all the way through, build a really crappy pipeline, and then plug more detail in, but let's get all the way to the end and then go back and fill in the details. So there are some pieces of that we're doing within it. It's not clearly defined sprints necessarily because we're doing so many projects at the same time. But really to say, like, I mean, even from the beginning of that 12 weeks to the end of that 12 weeks, the scope has changed substantially as you learn more things about the data. So
you don't have dedicated teams to actually make it a true agile thing, right? You've got more than one project under.
For the summer, it's really based, like, we have teams of 3 or 4 that are working on each project, so they're full in on learning the content and the context and really working with that particular data set. So within each one, part of it depends on the project manager, because we have 3 different project managers across the 12 projects. So it really does shift, but a lot of it's more, okay, have we dug into this enough? And because it's a training program for grad students, like, saying, like, we could spend all summer just digging into this one thing. Like, I know we don't have all the answers yet, but that's part of it. Like, let's start digging into, we have some initial analysis. We can now say that, you know, this is the area we want to focus on because we both have the most data and potentially the most impact. And so there are definitely cycles in that section. We can talk about it. Cool. Okay.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, in terms, I'm one of the fellows, and she was my PM, and he's actually on my team. He was on my team. And
Got plants. Yes.
Yeah, and I feel like part of having, like, if you want really fast development, is encouraging on your team for everybody to know what everybody else is working on, and encouraging.
Oh, that's any project.
The what?
Transparency on any project is critical.
Yeah, but like so much in industry, I feel like, at least when I've been working on teams, it's like someone could ask me, like, what does the person that you're sitting next to me, what are they working on for the last 2 days? And I'll be like, I have no clue. So, and that was like unique to this summer and the fellowship, is that I actually knew what everybody on my team was working on, and people were challenging me about what I got done, like in the last couple of days. Yeah.
It's
What? Like nothing.
Depending on the size and scale of the project, total transparency is difficult because a lot of people, like, for example, if you're in software and someone's building hardware, it's like you could really care, and you really don't want to be bothered. But it is, transparency is a big deal. It really is.
We've got a couple.
So when you send you accept a proposal, do you prefer to have an organization submit one specific goals, or is it okay to have multiple goals, and do the more agile process, we kind of figure it out.
Yeah, so as we're taking proposals, like we put a request up online that has some very specific questions. We've definitely had people that were like, here's 4 things we think we want to answer, and that first scoping call, based on what's there, is like, okay, let's dig into that. Is there actually enough data there? Or is there real impact? It's more the level of detail on, do we have enough of an idea of the shape of it that we know kind of the next questions we would ask? So we usually start there. And often, even if someone comes in with one idea, we usually, by the time we finish scoping it, end somewhere else. And then by the time, we say a lot like, okay, cool, we've spent maybe 5 hours on the phone with people over a couple of months to get to something scoped, like, on average, probably. By the time the fellows start, they are a team of 3 or 4 people spending 8 hours a day looking at this data. Like, they're gonna know a huge amount more 1 week in than what we thought it might be going in. And so usually to get to like, okay, if we're looking for environmental impact from preventing spills, right? And you're looking at violations, are you looking for the places that just have 1 violation, like any violation, multiple violations, the most severe violations? And these are things that usually, those kinds of questions sort of evolve over time. There's another question up here.
I was just curious about the communication chasm and how you find a shared vernacular. Because I imagine the point person applying online has some familiarity, and that's why they've submitted the application, but when it comes to working with a team on the organization or governmental stakeholder side, not everyone is going to be familiar with the processing of the language employed in data science. So how do you have a meaningful, substantive, robust, reciprocal conversation where it's not just didactic on one side when people have such different backgrounds?
I think, and maybe some of the fellows can chime in, but we spend a lot of time kind of educating in both directions. Like, we're certainly not criminal justice experts. Like, what's the difference between jail and prison, right? And like trying to set that comfortable space for asking these questions of like, hey, I'm a complete newbie to this, so sorry if this is a dumb question. But, and I know for me, like, as I will say I'm a technologist but not a data scientist, being like, precision, recall, what do you, like, tell me this in terms that, like, having someone who can be a proxy to say, I understand enough of what's going on here, but break it down for me, like, I have no idea, and being able to kind of iterate on some of those, that there's someone in the middle, not necessarily translating, but asking and going, like, okay, that didn't really make sense, can you give me more details, so that when we go back to partners, we're kind of explaining what's going on.
So like dictionaries then, great, data dictionaries.
Yeah, I mean, we're spending tons of time usually going back and forth and saying, the better the data dictionary, the more awesome, because otherwise we're like, cool, this column's named like, I don't know, years since service or something, and you're like, okay, I have some guesses of what that, I think that means, but I've also been a developer, so I know that that probably will change at some point from what the column header is to what it's actually doing. And so having those discussions of like, cool, we're looking at this field, what is that? Or we're guessing this is important, and you're just like, yeah, it's important because it's, whether it was AM or PM or something, where you're like, we can't do anything with that.
What is a data dictionary?
So data dictionary is usually just saying like, okay, for each of these columns in a database, what is that field actually capturing, and what are the different options for it? So it's explaining it in human language what the different data fields are.
Or the formula.
Or the formula, yeah. Certainly if it's something that's a derived information, knowing how did you get to this number from the 3 other variables that we're doing it. I want to be sensitive to time, so I think there's a 10 minutes until the next session, but we'll be here all day tomorrow too.